Paperback Rocker, episode 81. Hey, this is Matt Severson, the Paperback Rocker, and I'm broadcasting from my 6x9 foot cinder block shack in the desert of northern Mexico, southern Texas. Welcome and thanks for checking out my show.
Here he is, fueled by espresso and popsicles, British rock, and Earl Grey, the Paperback Rocker.
Hey everybody, what's up? It's your old friend Matt. You know the one, the Paperback Rocker. I'm back again with my little podcast, the Paperback Rocker Show. Thanks for being with me. I have for you tonight yet another installment, volume of the audiobook Blue Whiskey, a novel that I wrote, and I'm going to go ahead and get to it pretty quick tonight because I don't have much time. When last we read, Stanton Wheelhouse III had spent a night howling at the moon, basically, on the beach next to a fire, sitting on some driftwood, playing guitar, primal screaming, basically just having a big fit, and I don't think he really knows why at this point. He has just woken up, and we will pick up the story there. You can buy my books on Amazon. You can contact me at paperbackrocker@live.com. You can get a copy from me. I'll mail it to you. I can arrange that. Anyway, here we go. We're on the bottom of page 144. I lingered in the water until the churning abrasiveness of salt water and sand had cleansed me. Finally, I was wide awake and able to process cogent thought. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something in me had changed. The sun was directly overhead and the day was warm. I resigned myself to confusion and walked from the ocean, stripping my shirt and throwing it on the sand at the edge of the waves, walking with the immodesty of Adam before his original sin. I walked to the driftwood bench from the previous night and sat down, trying to untie tangled chronologies in my hazy mind. I looked at the burned-out bonfire, then saw the empty jug in the sand beside me. I picked the vessel up and turned it over. In grease pencil on the bottom were the words fungus batch. Under that was XXX, 3 X's. Lydia had performed a clandestine operation I later learned was called dosing, which is inducing an hallucinogenic trip on an unsuspecting person. I was furious and smashed the jug on the piece of driftwood, but after thinking about our interaction the day before, I came to believe her actions were intended not to harm me, but to teach me something, to enlighten me. Lucy. Shh. I walked over to Wanderlust to get my notebook. I was still naked. Lesson learned. Beware of drinks of suspicious origin. Years later, I tracked Lydia down and asked to know her motivations for dosing me. Hold on a second. Lucy, I'm recording here. Shh. Quiet. Be quiet right now. Years later, I tracked Lydia down and asked to know her motivations for dosing me. She said, Lucy, quit. Shush. She said, you was different. I can't really remember her voice. She said, you was different afterwards, weren't you? And sat there sucking down A&W like it was the best thing on earth. She knew what she was doing when she foisted that blue whiskey on me. My God. Lucy, stop. Years later, I tracked Lydia down and asked to know her motivations for dosing me. She said, "You was different afterwards, weren't you?" And sat there sucking down A&W like it was the best thing on earth. She knew what she was doing when she foisted that blue whiskey on me. I was different after consuming Fungus Batch Triple X. The sky and ocean had changed too, being both bigger and deeper, and I detected things in my peripheral vision I had ignored before. I'll try to explain it. Normally, our mind has a filter on it, which only allows in a finite amount of sensory information. Think of it like a drain in a sink. Normally, the drain is rather small, and what flows through it into our brain is nice and manageable. Under the influence of an hallucinogen, that drain enlarges to the size of a manhole, and a tsunami of observation floods in from every sense simultaneously. In a sober state, this would be information overload, thus the brain's protective filter, which is a coping mechanism the body uses. After ingesting the blue whiskey that night on the beach, my life was wide open, and the stimulus rushing into me would have overwhelmed any storm drain. My brain was like the eyepiece of a giant telescope, taking in the entire sky all at once. Along with that, I smelled seaweed and salt water and pine trees and the fire and dead fish, and the flames of the bonfire illuminated sparkling grains of sand and ripples like miniature Saharan dunes. These observations were taking place while I improvised on my guitar and sang along with the spirit of the universe, all at the same time, and there was much more than that. It wasn't a trip I wanted to take again the next night, or even again in my life, I thought at first. But I would trip about once a year through the late 60s and 70s, because it did change my perspective. That is valuable to an artist. George Harrison told me he achieved the same state through meditation, but I never had the patience for that. Much easier to pop a pill with Keith Richards and skylark around in one of his Rolls Royces than travel to India and live in a hut for 6 weeks. I put on some fresh clothes, a tight pair of Levi's and my silver blouse with the ruffled cuffs, and went for a long walk on the beach. Yes, I was definitely different than the day before. I had become Stanton Wheelhouse III, artist. No longer was I an insecure teenager. I wasn't ready to kick the world's door down by any means, but the last few days had informed me that I was me, and that was enough. I wasn't my dad. I couldn't do what he did, and he couldn't do what I did. And that was okay. The timing couldn't have been better. I would sleep in New York City that night. Okay, that's the bottom of, or that is page 146. And we will start in on chapter 13. Lucy has quieted, so maybe I can get this done. Chapter 13, page 147. Riding this wave of newfound self-assurance, I electro-glided into New York City in my Chevy like a phenom to be discovered within 24 hours or so. With the aid of several less than polite locals, I found Greenwich Village after unknowingly crisscrossing the district dozens of times, unsure of my location. The city was awesome in size, and Greenwich Village was huge compared to the quaint French Quarter of New Orleans. I recognized a street with a name Reuben had mentioned, Bleecker. I mashed the brakes, oblivious to the cars following close behind, which piled up. I heard the crash and glanced in my side view mirror and saw a muscular Italian man step out of a Cadillac. I panicked and burned rubber and turned right at the next intersection. Before rounding the corner, my rear view mirror reflected to me that the Italian had entered into an animated conversation with the man who had rear-ended him. I pulled Wanderlust to the curb and jumped out, making a quick circle around the vehicle to ensure all doors were locked. With head down, I crossed the street and made my way back to Bleecker and strolled quickly in the opposite direction from the accident scene, where police lights now flashed. I came to a bar packed with revelers. A Chuck Berry song I recognized blasted from the place, but I passed it. It was too crowded for my taste. Unlike the busy bars in the French Quarter, no man on the street implored me to enter. On the next block, I tentatively entered another drinking establishment, again with no man outside. I passed through the door, and my eyes struggled to adapt to the shadowy interior. A hulking figure stepped forward and grasped my forearm. "Covers $2." I reached in my pocket and struggled to read the denominations of the bills I held in the darkness. The man lacked the patience to wait for me and reached delicately to pluck a couple singles from my wad. He held them up in front of me so I could see I had not been cheated and said, "Enjoy yourself, tourist." "Thank you," I said, both out of politeness and gratitude for not being ripped off. He did not respond, but put his hand on the small of my back and gently pushed me into the saloon. I stepped forward and was surprised to see how much it resembled the Thirsty Possum, for it was very deep and not very wide. I was at once part of an enthusiastic throng, although I felt as insignificant as a freckle on a redhead's nose, even in my silver blouse. My mind flailed like a panicked swimmer in a rip current. I remembered Reuben inferring that the patrons of the Thirsty Possum were somewhat bland compared to the denizens of the village, and I now understood what he meant. I had gone from big fish to guppy, and it sent me into shock. I stumbled out of the club and across the street to a liquor store and purchased a pint of Jim Beam. I didn't know what else to do. Reaching for alcohol had never been my coping method, but this was an exception. The bourbon was like medicine on the frontier given to a gut-shot man. I put the pint in my back pocket and lit out walking, taking pulls from the bottle when I felt it safe. I should not have worried about public consumption of alcohol. Far worse was taking place in shadows all around me, although I did not recognize that on my first night in Greenwich Village. Let me get a drink. I walked slowly, taking in the sights, smells, and sounds. Thank God my brain had reinstalled its filter, or it would have been overwhelmed. I had never seen so many people, and it was the middle of the night. My mind was like George Bailey exploring Potterville. I had not witnessed deprivation like this. Bourbon Street revelers were mostly innocents abroad, having a bit of a lark. This was the seedy underbelly of one of the largest cities in the world, and these people were locals, whether they had lived there a week or all their lives. Later I found out that Greenwich Village was far from the Sodom I imagined it, compared to other parts of New York City. I wandered until I was lost. Who am I kidding? I was lost from the minute I stepped out of my Chevy, but now I was scared. For the first time since leaving home, I thought I might have made a mistake. My drunkenness did nothing to aid me in finding my way back, but I somehow located Wanderlust around 4 or 5 in the morning. I got in the back and slept without a cover, having abandoned my soiled sleeping bag to the Atlantic. I did not sleep well and woke up a few hours later, more sober but still confused and worried. Once again I locked Wanderlust and ventured on an exploratory mission. Things had changed dramatically in Greenwich Village with the dawn. I strolled nonchalantly, and my mind was now like George Bailey saved from the afterlife. I saw a man sweeping the sidewalk in front of his fruit stand and said, "It's a fine morning, isn't it, sir? I don't believe I've seen a finer morning." "Welcome to the Big Apple," he said, and tossed me a Red Delicious. How was it so obvious? I'll see you again and pay for this, I promise, I said, holding up this fine example of the worst of all apple varieties like it was made of gold. I polished it on my shirt and bit through the thick skin. It was mealy. I spit out the bite I had taken and tossed the rest of it into the gutter. I avoided that fruit stand for the rest of my time in the village. I walked a block without encountering another person. Skyscrapers loomed in the distance, and I felt very far from nature. Loomed sounds threatening, but they were an inspiration this morning. Crowning achievements of mankind. If those things could be built, I could make a go of it as a singer in New York. You had a scare the night before, I told myself. Nothing really, just a little anxiety. I understood another thing at that moment as I surveyed the immense complexity around me. I was like an ant among all this. I needed to acquire a map and try to get my bearings. Aimless wandering would get me nowhere. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Hope you enjoyed that. Sorry about the interruption from the noisiest terrier ever. I'll be coming at you soon, more than likely this week. Might be the weekend, I don't know. See how busy I am. But hope you're enjoying the book. As always, I will see you not too long from now with another volume of the Blue Whiskey novel.
The Paperback Rocker has signed off.